Ellie. I teach sewing and crafts at the library, and today I'm going to show you how to sew this simple drawstring bag. This is a really easy, beginner-friendly project. However, in this video, I will be focusing on sewing with precision so you can really develop your sewing skills. So let's get started. For this project, you will need 4 pieces of fabric cut to 14 inches by 15 3/4 inches, 2 of them in your outer fabric and 2 of them in your lining fabric. You will also need 2 rectangles of fabric cut to 2 inches by 14 inches in your outer fabric. You will need 2 pieces of ribbon cut to 2 inches. I'm using a 5/8 inch width ribbon. You could also use 1/2 inch width. And you're going to need 2 pieces of either thin rope or parachute cord, each cut to 65 inches. As for supplies, you're going to need sewing pins, a large safety pin, fabric scissors, a measuring tape, and of course a sewing machine. So we're going to begin with our 2 inch by 14 inch pieces. These are going to be the casing that holds our cords at the top of the bag. So you want to flip your fabric so the wrong side is facing up, and then on one of the short edges, fold it up a 1/4 inch. Okay, and then give that a press. And then fold it over again. We still want this to be about a 1/4 inch, so just check it. Yep. Give it another press. And then I'm just going to put a pin in here just to hold it in place until I get to my sewing machine. You're going to repeat this for the other short edge, and then just stitch this seam down, or this hem down, pretty close to the edge here. So I've already finished that on this piece, on both ends. So now I'm going to fold it in half long ways. And give it another press. Before we move on, take a second to measure your casing pieces. They should be 13 inches long. If you're within an 1/8 of an inch above or below, you should be fine, but make sure they're both the exact same length. This will just make sure our bag looks nice and neat at the end. So next we're going to take one of our outer pieces and along the top I'm going to center one of the casing pieces so that the raw edges are together. So there should be about a 1/2 inch on either side. There we go. Okay, and then I'm just going to pin this in place. Okay, and then at the bottom edge, take your 2 pieces of ribbon, fold them in half, and then we're going to pin them near the bottom. Make sure they are 1/2 inch above that bottom edge. And again, we're pinning so that the raw edges are together. Okay, just like that. So the loops of the ribbon are facing in. And then I'm gonna go to my sewing machine and sew the casing to the outer fabric with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, it's really important to be accurate here because we're also going to attach the other casing to the top of our other lining fabric the same way we did the first one. And again, make sure you're using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm here at my sewing machine to help you find 1/8 of an inch. This can be kind of difficult to do and to maintain if you're not used to being really accurate while you're sewing. So on my brother, there's a little tick mark on the foot right there. It's the first one to the right of where the needle is. That's 1/8 of an inch. So you see I've got my fabric underneath the foot and lined up right there. And so I'm gonna try my best to maintain that for the whole length of the fabric. I've taught sewing for about a year now, and one thing that I've learned is that some people really want to go fast on the machines. And from my experience, it's better to go slow so you can be accurate rather than trying to speed through, because you're more likely to make mistakes, especially when you need to keep really precise seam allowances, like in this project. And to be fair, if you're a little off, it won't be the end of the world, but what will happen is that the two casings for the strings or the ropes, they aren't gonna line up perfectly at the top. This is a really good project for a beginner who's comfortable with the machine but is ready for a little bit of a challenge, because overall this pattern is not difficult, but it does require some precision if you really want your bag to fit together really well. So you can see I'm just taking my time, keeping an eye on that little tick mark on the foot and making sure that my fabric lines up with that. Even if you go the slowest setting on your machine, it's still going to be faster and more secure than hand sewing. So there's no shame in going slow. And in fact, I think it can be helpful a lot of times. Okay, so I finished this, and eventually we are going to flip the casing up so it'll stick up at the top of the bag. So just repeat this with that 1/8 of an inch seam allowance for your other outer piece. Now it's time to put our outer bag together. So I've got my outer piece with the ribbons still pinned on, down right side up. Now I'm going to take my other outer piece and line it up on top so that the right sides are facing each other. make sure that casing is folded down. Okay, so I'm gonna put pins all the way around, and we're gonna sew on these 3 sides, leave the top with the casings open, and we're gonna sew with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. It is also really important to be accurate with this seam, because if you remember, our casings are 1/2 inch from the edge of the fabric, and so are our ribbons at the bottom. We don't want to sew these shut because this is going to be where our rope goes. And a 3/8 is just under 1/2 inch. So I'm going to keep pinning this, and then I'll meet you at the sewing machine to help you find that 3/8 inch seam. So we're back at my sewing machine. I've got a brother, and unfortunately it doesn't have a guideline or a mark for 3/8 of an inch. However, it does give me the option to move the position of the needle to the right slightly. So I've done that. And now when I line my fabric up with this guideline right here, which is marked as 5/8 of an inch, since I've moved my needle over, it's now going to give me 3/8. So if you don't have a brother, I'm not sure exactly what procedure you'll need to follow, but just make sure that you're going to get that 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to start sewing. And it's going to be a little strange at first because we've got all this extra bulk up here from the casings. My foot isn't totally flush with the bottom plate of the machine. Okay. So I've passed the casing, so it should be smooth sailing from here. And again, I'm just going to take my time and make sure that the edge of my fabric is always lining up with this little guideline. I guess you can't see it too well, but there's a little indent in the plate here. So now that I'm near the corner, I want to make sure that when I turn my work, I'm still going to maintain that 3/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to go and turn it and see where I am. Alright, so I'm slightly past my guideline, so I'm going to turn it back and make one more stitch. There we go. The end is kind of fraying here, but I'm pretty much lined up with that line. And then I'm just going to continue. And you may notice that I'm sewing on the selvage edge here, which usually you shouldn't really do. However, I didn't have a whole lot of this fabric left, but I still really wanted to use it, so I decided to just go for it. So I just finished sewing my outer bag, and I know that originally I told you to sew it with the casings folded in, but now I'm realizing it's probably going to be easier for you to sew it with it folded out. That way you don't have to worry about sewing these shut, which truthfully I did on one side, but that's okay, and it's okay if you do it too. That's what seam rippers are for. So you want to make sure that both of your sets of casings are still open, that you didn't sew through them, and that your ribbons at the bottom are also not sewn closed. You can still get some string through there. So now I'm going to snip off the corners at the bottom. This will just get rid of that extra bulk. It'll make it easier to make it lay flat when we turn it right sides out. Okay, so then we're going to move on to our lining fabric. So I already have it lined up with right sides facing together, like that. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to sew on 3 sides with that 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, but this time leave a 4-inch opening at the bottom. This is going to be how we turn the bag right sides out once it's all put together. So I marked that with 2 pins on either side of that 4-inch gap, just so when I'm sewing, I'll remember to stop. Now I have both my outer fabric and the lining sewn together, and as you can see, I have flipped the outside bag right sides out, but I've left the inner bag with the right sides facing in. So now I'm just going to put my outer bag inside of the inner bag, so we have the right sides of the fabric facing each other. And I know it's a little hard to tell the difference between the right side and the wrong side of this lining fabric, but we've got the seams on the outside, so that's how we know that that is the wrong side of the fabric. We want our casing to be tucked in for this time. So we can start on the sides and match up the side seams. So there's a lot of extra string going on there, but I've got my 2 side seams lined up. We can move our way to the other side and make sure this one's also lined up. So I'm going to put some pins in this to secure it, and then I'll meet you at the sewing machine where we will sew all the way around the outside of this opening of the bag with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we're back at the sewing machine, and now I'm going to help you find the 1/4 inch mark on your machine. So on my brother, there's a second little tick mark on the foot. That's going to be a 1/4 inch. But remember, last time we moved the needle over to the right, so I've already moved it back to its starting position at the left. So from its left position to this second little tick mark on the foot, that's a 1/4 inch. Keep in mind that we are also about to go through a lot of layers of fabric, so I have increased my stitch length to like 3.5, and I also bumped the tension down to help us get through all those layers. Alright, so I'm just gonna once again take my time, pay attention to where my fabric is right in front of the foot. When I first started sewing, I had a really hard time keeping a straight line. And I realized it was because I would stare at the needle the whole time that I sewed. But really, the needle's not going anywhere. It's never gonna move. Other than up and down, it stays in the same place. What does move is the fabric. So that's where you want to keep your focus. Especially the fabric that's right in front of the foot. Keep your eye right here, and so you can anticipate where it's going to help it go with the seam allowance that you want. Okay, I'm going to continue just like this until I go all the way around the top of the bag and meet back up where I started. I've got my bag sewn together, so now it's time to turn it right sides out. So we're going to go to that gap that we left in the lining fabric, and I'm just going to gently roll it down so that our outer fabric starts to show, and so does the right side of our lining fabric. And to get the corners to come out, I like to just roll the fabric in my fingers near the corner to gently get them to come out. Okay. Then make sure the outer fabric is looking good. Okay, so now we just need to close the hole that we left for our lining. So just fold the seam in so that it's flush with the existing seams at the bottom of the bag. Put a couple pins in there, and then I would sew maybe with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, starting a little bit before the gap and ending a little bit after. So we make sure that we get that nice and closed. It's okay that there's only going to be stitches just in part of the lining because it's going to be on the inside of the bag. We won't see it. Alright, so I'm going to finish that up and then I will show you the next step. So it's probably hard to see on camera, but I have the gap in the lining of my bag stitched closed. So now we're just going to push it to the inside of the bag. So it is actually the lining now. Give it a good shake. Okay, so we're almost done. Next, I would just go around and press this outside really flat so that the seam where the casing and the top of the bag meet is nice and smooth. And then we're going to take this to the machine and top stitch all the way around the outside of the bag with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So that's 1/8 of an inch from the seam that's connecting the casing and that outer bag. So this is our last step at the sewing machine. We're almost done. So I just got back from my ironing board where I ironed this outside seam really flat and smooth all the way around the bag. And I also went to the inside and ironed the lining fabric down as well. So both layers are really flat and smooth. So now we're ready to top stitch. So I'm going to start kind of on the side. And again, we're using 1/8 of an inch allowance. So this time the seam where the main bag and the casing meet, that's what we want to line up with that 1/8 of an inch tick mark. Okay. And again, we're trying to go through multiple layers of fabric here, so I've left the longer stitch length and a slightly looser tension. And you'll notice that I didn't backstitch, so I don't want to backstitch at the beginning and the end of my stitches, because then we'll just get kind of a visible chunk of thicker stitches that'll stand out a lot. So I'm not doing any back stitching at the beginning, but then once I meet back up with my original stitches, once we get all the way around the outside of the bag, I'm going to stitch on top of the first couple of those, and then maybe do like one actual back stitch. That way it just kind of looks a little bit neater. We don't have to do a whole lot of back stitching. Also, if you pay attention and maintain that 1/8 of an inch allowance, you should meet right back up with where you started. So here is our lovely top stitching all the way around the top of the bag. This step isn't absolutely necessary. If we left it out, our bag would still stay together. But what it does is keep the outer fabric and the lining fabric from rolling up and kind of covering up the casing. It just is that last finishing touch to really make your work look precise and clean. So now it's time to add the straps. So you can see I've already added one. So with my other piece of paracord, I took our large safety pin and just stuck it through one end. And this is going to kind of act like a needle to help us feed the rope through. So I've already done the strap on the left side, so now we're going to start on the right. And I'm just going to push the safety pin into the casing. And then to feed it through, you can just scrunch some fabric towards the safety pin and then use your right hand to just pull it back. And we're just going to do that till we come out on the other end. Okay, so now I can pull some out. And now we're going through the back casing. So these two straps are on the left side, so just ignore those. Going through, same method. Alright, so now we have both ends of this one string coming out of the right side. And now we just want to pull the string so that the two ends are even. So we can pull this one a little bit more. Go back and make sure that there's no scrunching on the top of the bag, and then check to see how even the ends of your cord are, and that looks pretty good. So I'm going to unhook the safety pin. Alright, now I'm going down to the side, and I'm going to string one of these through the ribbon. And now I'm just going to pull it out a little bit so that I can tie both of these together in an overhand knot. You want to pull this pretty secure. And that is it. So here is our completed drawstring bag. It easily scrunches up to close and does the same thing to open again. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you take up the challenge to be really super precise with this project so that you can learn more about your machine and develop your sewing technique. I'll see you guys next time, and I hope you have a great week. Bye.